the importance of interconnected risks, and we've really seen that in the last few years, that sort of cascade or ripple effect of risks. I mean, we're never going to be able to compete with AI in terms of the analysis. Working in that sort of GRC space, it's one of those few disciplines where you are really cross-cutting in an organisation. It brings in all those different aspects of strategy, risk, resilience, compliance. So you're kind of right in the centre of the really important business conversations.
It's never been more exciting. We're finally getting those strategic seats around the table as a risk professional. Yeah.
So it's about changing from identifying risks to how do you navigate uncertainty. So, AI will give you insight, but it doesn't provide judgment. It'll give you data, but there's no context. It can provide capability, but it can't give you accountability. It'll shift in focus from list of risks to outcomes we need to protect.
Welcome to Spotlight on Women in GRC, a podcast series created to continue the conversations sparked by the Women in GRC Awards 2026 and carry those insights beyond the event. Backed by key sponsor, CoreStream GRC, the series shines a light on women shaping governance, risk and compliance, exploring their backgrounds, experiences and perspectives on what's changing across the industry. I'm your host, Lucy Montague, and today I'm joined by Emma Price. Hello, Emma.
Good morning, Lucy. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm good. Looking forward to the conversation.
Emma, could you start by just introducing yourself, telling us a little bit about your current role and your career background?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Lucy, and lovely to be here today. So I'm currently a partner, or what we call a pioneer, at Brave, which is a boutique GRC advisory business where I'm helping to grow the risk and resilience practice in the UK market. But really, I think if I look back at my career journey, that has been more than 25 years now, helping boards make better decisions under uncertainty. And I've done that in a number of different ways. So I started in industry, but then moved into Big Four. And today I continue to do that in lots of different ways. So as well as my advisory role, I also work teaching MBA students. I work as part of an industry body, Resilience First. I act as a NED. So lots of different roles, but I guess the common thread is really helping organisations make better decisions.
So, as you say, you're covering a lot of different things. Like your schedule during the week must be crazy. What is that portfolio approach like in comparison to what you were doing when you were at the Big Four?
I guess to some extent it's similar, because in Big Four you've always still got that portfolio of different clients and different challenges that you're helping them solve. So to that extent, it's similar, trying to do that eternal juggle. But I think what really attracts me to doing those different roles and why I enjoy having the variety is just looking for opportunities where I can add value. And I'd like to think that I add value in lots of different ways. And actually, I take something different from all of those roles that helps me deliver better in the other roles. So they're kind of reinforcing. So, the advisory work obviously tells me what the executives are struggling with. And so I can take that then into conversations from the other side of the table in my NED role and kind of the board thinking. The industry groups let me see how the industry is evolving. The teaching really lets me see what our next generation of risk leaders are thinking about and the challenges they're seeing. So I'd say I probably learn as much as I teach across all of those. But again, I think they're all mutually reinforcing. So it doesn't feel like it's a heavy workload. I thoroughly enjoy what I do.
Oh, lovely. Your finger is definitely on the pulse, Emma.
Probably in too many pies.
Very good. If we go back to the beginning, what first drew you into the world of governance, risk and compliance?
Wow, look, I think like lots of people you probably speak to who say, I didn't really realise a career in risk existed, going back to sort of 99, 2000. I think what really kind of drew me into it was, and it's going to sound a little bit twee, but curiosity. I think working in that sort of GRC space, it's one of those few disciplines where you are really cross-cutting in an organisation. It brings in all those different aspects of strategy, risk, resilience, compliance. So you're kind of right in the centre of the really important business conversations. So there was that piece about actually being curious. I'm a big picture thinker, and so being able to put all those pieces together and see how you can help businesses do things better, make better decisions, really appealed to me. And also, I suppose at the time I was kind of growing up, if you like, through the risk path. There was a number of really high profile corporate scandals, things like Thomas Cook, Carillion, BHS, Patisserie Valerie, all these different situations where organisations hadn't succeeded. And a lot of that was underpinned by governance challenges. And so again, thinking about what was the difference between those organisations who really succeeded and thrived and those who maybe didn't, and trying to understand what that was. And that, I think, is what's kept me really interested in this field for the last however many years, and will continue to keep me interested, I think, because the external environment is changing all the time, and that's always bringing those new challenges. So there's forever something different, something new to think about, and a new complex problem to unpick, and that's what keeps it really interesting for me.
So no 2 days are the same.
Never.
How has the conversation around enterprise risk changed over the last 5 years, and where do you see it going?
Look, I mean, interesting, massively, I would say, a huge shift. And I think I would, how would I summarize it? I think I would say it's about changing from identifying risks to how do you navigate uncertainty. And what I mean by that is that there's this much greater focus now on the importance of interconnected risks, and we've really seen that in the last few years, that sort of cascade or ripple effect of risks, whereas historically we've been quite focused on sort of long lists of individual and independent risks. And organisations now need to think more about how that works. They need to think more about these external factors like emerging technology, geopolitics, all the things we're talking about every day. And we don't know what is going to happen next. And so what I'm seeing is a real shift in the conversation away from this sort of more static list of risks approach to really thinking about actually what are the outcomes, the essential outcomes as a business that we really need to deliver no matter what. And if we don't deliver those things, they're going to cause harm to our stakeholders, however we choose to define those, whether that's employees, our shareholders, the broader sort of customer client base. And actually understanding then how do we protect those things or have an alternative way to deliver those outcomes irrespective of what the event is. And so that shifts the conversation where to an extent we don't really need to know whether it's a COVID risk, if it's a tsunami, if it's a massive cyber attack. We just need to focus on the priorities for the business, and then we can allocate resources accordingly. So a real shift in focus from list of risks to outcomes we need to protect, and then I guess what are the risks that would either prevent us from doing that or enable us to do that better.
Love that. Business value being at the centre of everything. Makes sense, yeah. When you walk into a boardroom today, what separates the organisations that view risk as that sort of strategic advantage versus those who are seeing it more as the traditional compliance tick box exercise?
I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think if we sort of sit on the other side of the table, the types of things that boards tend to worry about is actually, have we got the right information? How do we know what's really important? The board packs nowadays, like hundreds and hundreds of pages. And so how do you pick out from that? What are the things to really focus on? And so I'd say some of the key characteristics of those types of conversations that I would say are better examples of sort of the board discussion are those that really exhibit this. Again, I'm going to use that word curiosity, but it's that challenge and constructive challenge back to management. So not asking necessarily what are our biggest risks, but what are the things that are really going to stop us from meeting our objectives, and all the things that will enable us to go faster, deliver them better, and being able to make decisions at speed. And it's really interesting because I went to a session sponsored by Resilience First going back a couple of months now, and there was a lady there called Elizabeth Braw, and she sits on the Atlantic Council. And she used this incredible phrase, which has really stuck with me. And she said that business is no longer neutral. And I really like that, because what she was trying to say was actually, your business, you could be quite happily doing what you do in your organisation, playing no part in any kind of political agenda. And going back a few years, really, it would be more those sort of public sector organisations who would be the target of some of those politically motivated type disruptions. Nowadays, just by dint of where your organisation is based, who you serve, what you're delivering, you can be a target, and you can't necessarily predict that. You can't necessarily anticipate everything that's going to happen, but what you can do is be a lot more creative. And so I think back to your question, it's about those boards who are challenging actually, where is this data coming from? Have we thought creatively about the scenarios that we're using to predict and make some do some modelling and thinking around this? Because everything we said that wouldn't happen has probably happened. So are we being creative enough for thinking about some of those scenarios? And then importantly, what are the assumptions and the dependencies that you're relying on to kind of come back with the recommendations? Because actually, would they work under situation X or situation Y? And so really that constructive challenge, thinking about what's underpinning the data that's coming through, and being creative in terms of how they think about the risk landscape nowadays. Because, as you say, no 2 days are the same for any of us anymore, I don't think, are they?
Okay, so we've got curiosity and creativity so far, the two
Yeah.
key skills. Sounds good. So speaking of skill set, alongside your advisory work, you're teaching risk management at the University of Bath's MBA programme. What are the MBA students asking today that reflect how the profession is evolving?
Interesting question. And I guess MBA is interesting as well, because obviously you've got those students who have been in work and are seeing some of this firsthand. I would say even in the sort of 5, 6 years I've been teaching the course, there's been a real shift in interest from the frameworks and methodologies to much more actually how do we act as strategic advisors to a business. And it's interesting because when you get those people coming in, most of whom have no experience of risk management per se, their immediate assumption is that risk people in the business are these kind of strategic advisors, sort of right hand to the CEO. And the reality is, very rarely, unfortunately, do we see people ending up in that position. So that there's a gap between the outside in expectation and maybe how the profession has historically evolved. So I think that the next generation coming through are much more prepared to kind of challenge, to think about actually how do you influence decisions, how do we use technology to do that. Particularly I get lots of questions about the use of AI in risk thinking. How do you influence and work with sort of senior people in the business? So a lot more practical, I think, and a lot less focus on the theory and the frameworks.
That's really interesting because the Woman of the Year for 2025, who gave her sort of keynote speech at the awards, she
Mm-hmm.
also spoke to this and she said, it's never been more exciting. We're finally getting those strategic seats around the
Yeah,
table as a risk
absolutely.
professional. Yeah. So it is for the next generation who are thinking about GRC, it is a really interesting time and it is something to consider. If you're into business and you're into strategy, risk could be the way forward.
Well, I mean, I think so. And again, it's one thing that's kept me in it for all this time, because it is never the same. And actually, what's not to love about the fact that you're right in there, or should be right in there, thinking about, the strategic objectives and the direction of the business, the vision, how that changes and alters as we see all these sort of macro risks coming through and changing the landscape. So again, you're across the intersection of so many different disciplines when you sit in that risk space. And one thing I see used quite a lot actually with some of my clients is even for sort of younger people coming through, so say graduates or fast track graduates, to almost rotate them in and out of risk roles, because actually it gives them a great 360 view of the business. So it's just a really good way to learn more about the organisation that you work in.
Lovely. Now, I ask this question to every guest, but I'm particularly interested to hear your answer because I know in your previous life you've worked with so many chief compliance and chief risk officers. But the statistics show that women make up roughly 50% of the entry level roles in GRC, yet only 17% of chief risk officers and 14% of chief compliance officers are women. Why do you think that gap exists, and does that resonate with what you've seen in the market?
And look, it's an interesting question, isn't it? And it's going to sound like I'm dodging it, but I don't think there's any single explanation. I think there's a couple of things spring to mind. One is that we often focus on the appointment itself, but actually there's a whole period of time that leads up to the appointment of a chief risk officer, compliance officer, whatever it might be. And so there's a really important piece before the appointment, I think, which is all about actually who gets those stretch opportunities, who gets to work with the board or exposure to the executive, who gets to lead during big periods of transformation, and particularly who has got strong sponsors that are advocating for them as they go through that career progression. So I think there's a whole piece around making sure that pathway to actual that sort of CRO role is really considered and thought through. But then I also think the second point I'd make is I think the role of the CRO is changing. So going back to your point before and the conversations that you've had with previous guests, absolutely technical expertise is always going to be sort of the baseline, but it's the given. It's all the pieces that layer on top of that. And particularly today, it's all about influence. It's about constructive challenge, asking better questions and really listening, connecting risk to strategy and objectives and outcomes. And that's the type of sort of experience that you only get through doing, I think, a diversity of roles as well. It's quite difficult to bring that level of challenge and rigor when you've always kind of had one sort of siloed view of a particular functional part of the business. So again, it kind of comes back to this piece of, are we giving women, anyone, the right sort of career paths to actually progress through to take up some of those roles, because they are really big, broad roles, and so you need to be quite fluid and flexible in terms of the skills that you bring to that. So I don't know if I would say it's particularly about necessarily needing to have to put a number on the percentage and increase that. I think it's more about that diversity of experience, diversity of thought that a good CRO or compliance officer would bring into the role, and actually making sure that we're encouraging people to think about that as they progress their careers.
And your MBA classes, how diverse is it?
So interestingly, I'd say they tend to be a pretty good gender-wise. They tend to be a fairly equal mix. I think what's also interesting is you see a lot of overseas students, obviously, kind of coming through, who are keen to kind of take that back and push that more broadly. What I would also say, and I might be a bit biased here, because I'm a parent to 4 children, 3 of whom are neurodiverse, and what I would say is certainly coming through the classroom, there's a lot more neurodivergent individuals, and that changes the thinking, and in a fantastic way. And again, it's about that, having that diversity of thought, different perspectives, and particularly with something like risk, where there's generally not one right answer. The more you can bring in different perspectives to make those decisions, the better. So I would say, is it about gender? Not particularly for me. It's all about the difference in thinking and styles, and what that brings.
Very interesting. Have you personally experienced any barriers or biases in your career, and how did you go about navigating them?
Oh, look, that's a
The
tricky one,
heavy
isn't it?
questions here, Emma.
What would I say? I would say I've been the only woman in the room on multiple occasions, and I'm still, and then will no doubt continue to be. I think my learning from that, if I kind of turn that into kind of practical, what my top tips, I don't think you need to be loud to be the most influential person in the room. It's not about who shouts the loudest. I think it's about who is the clearest in the room. So I would always argue sort of clarity is more important than airtime, particularly. And I think the sort of 3 little rules I have for myself, if you like, that have always stood me quite well. One is, when you're in a situation like that, is to speak earlier in the conversation. But when you do speak, try and reframe and ask a strategic question, rather than waiting to answer a technical question, which might feel more in the comfort zone. So kind of don't fall into that trap of kind of putting yourself as the technical expert. Kind of show some bigger picture thinking. And I think it's about just connect everything back to organizational objectives, or the so what. I think my team used to get really grumpy at me, because I would always be like, well, so what, why? And it's that kind of really challenging and thinking that bit through. And I think if you can follow those, even if you might feel a bit like, oh, I'm the only, female, male, whatever it might be in a room, it's about what you contribute to that conversation, and finding a way to kind of really earn your place and own your place at the table.
I love that. That's very easy, actionable advice that any woman can take, inside or outside of GRC. That's really helpful. For the men who are in that room, if there is the one woman at the table, or for just the wider organisations, how can they do a better job of supporting women and being the allies to help them in their leadership roles in GRC?
Well, I think, look, there's lots of talk about mentoring, coaching, and they're great, and I have done both. But I would say the thing that makes the biggest difference is proper proactive sponsorship. So that a proper sponsor, if you like, will really open the doors. They will champion you when you're not in the room. They will help you find the opportunities. So it's not someone that's more passive, which tends to be. I mean, there's nothing wrong with mentoring or coaching, and again, I've taken lots from being on the other end of that, but it doesn't necessarily have that active outcome that you might look for. So for me, it's all about, if you're kind of going to put it that way, in terms of men supporting women, it's about how do you actively open doors, promote them, talk about them when they're not in the room, and really take a proper interest in their career progression.
Lovely. And have you had someone who's done that for you in your career?
I have, yeah, I've been really fortunate, actually, both men and women. And I think, if I reflect on probably one of the things I'm most proud of about my career, I would say that has been to do with the network that I've built over the years, which is really diverse, and it's across, competitors, peers, clients, globally. And organisations like Risky Women are great as a way of kind of connecting women on the female agenda. And I think those people have been fantastic in terms of being there to pick me up when the going has got tough, in terms of being an advocate when I'm not in the room, and also getting me roles out in business. And I think, building a network is really important, particularly for women. And interesting, there was a study recently by the World Economic Forum actually that talked about senior roles in leadership, and particularly the role of networking in that and the importance of it. And I think sometimes as women, we're not always quite as brave and bold and brash as kind of walking up to people and making these connections, which is why forums like, Your Risky Women, for example, I use because that's what I'm familiar with. But they are very helpful in a much sort of softer way of connecting women as a way of making easy contacts and networks and builds. But I think you've got to go into those relationships with the view of, what can I give, not what can I get? And then by default, it kind of comes around. So, I think my network is phenomenal. I'm really lucky to have that, and I will also connect other people in my network to each other. And again, that's kind of how you grow, how you credentialize, and how people have your back when the times get tough.
Lovely, a real community around you, Emma.
Well, I hope so.
For those wondering about Risky Women as well, because Emma is obviously an ambassador, we have got an episode with the Chief Risky Women Officer, Kimberly, who founded the initiative. So do check that one out and learn more about the events and all the wonderful things that they do on their website as well. Moving into your kind of career, Emma, so was there a moment in your career when you had to take a leap in confidence or really back yourself, and what did that look like?
Well, I guess the one that's top of mind is the move out of Big Four, actually, because that was only the end of last year. So I'm now kind of 7 months into having stepped out of Big Four. And that's been interesting, actually, because I suppose I'd spent sort of 15, 16 years prior to that across a couple of the firms. And they're a phenomenal place to work. The networks are amazing, fantastic people. You do have the comfort blanket of the brand and all those people around you, and somebody always knows the answer to the question. And so choosing to kind of step away and go into sort of a smaller organization, you suddenly realize that people are therefore seeing you and not the brand. And that has actually been quite interesting. I laugh and say there's a bit of a light bulb moment where one of the clients this year sort of said to me, what's your opinion on this? And I was like, oh, my opinion. And it's kind of having to almost rethink. So and with that obviously kind of comes that vulnerability, and you do question yourself, because for a long time you kind of build your sort of professional persona around being this sort of Big Four partner, and people have a perception of that. And actually stepping away from that has been really liberating. And I have thoroughly enjoyed that sort of opportunity to really rethink, actually, what am I thinking, what am I doing, and all the different roles we talked about being able to get involved in. And I suppose if I play that back to my own thinking and talking about resilience and that connecting the risk and resilience with gender, it's about personal resilience, and kind of being adaptable, to pick up and do that on my own. But thoroughly enjoyed it. So that's been a great learning experience, but been uncomfortable along the way.
Oh, well, congratulations. You're still fairly new into the role, so I feel like I can still say that. Yeah. Can you share a moment at your time at the Big Four where you felt particularly proud or empowered for a particular project or moment in your career?
Well, that's a good one. I think the biggest thing for me, as I've talked about, is probably the network. I think it's really the sense of sort of achievement really comes from, whether it's Big Four or the work I'm doing with Brave. It's very much about helping organisations get value from their risk approaches, because I think historically that's been something that a lot of organisations have struggled with, and because we have no particular regulatory sort of drivers in the UK, it's very much, I guess, corporate governance code, but it's more that's comply or explain. There's no sort of really big specific legislation about how to do risk, or what to do in risk. It's very much about a value-based argument. And so really helping clients deliver against various engagements across a whole range of sort of risk and resilience related issues, but where we have seen outcomes that actually have fundamentally improved business performance. That has just been a huge moment. So working with an organisation at the moment, looking around how to bring together, say for example, where they're bringing together their risk and resilience functions, but again all driven by actually what is the value we are going to deliver for the business. How will this improve business performance, business outcome, less pressure on the business itself, while also, you know, being more effective in terms of managing upward stakeholders. And so it's all about that. That's my famous so what's, you know, why are we doing it? Where's the value? And I think it's those moments that make you feel most proud.
Seeing the results.
Yeah, absolutely.
Makes sense. Looking ahead, what do you think will define the next era of GRC, and how should leaders prepare for it?
Well, I mean, I guess the the obvious answer is going to have to be sort of technology, isn't it, really? I think it's going to be defined clearly by technology, but I think the bit that is most important for us as practitioners is judgment, because I mean, we're never going to be able to compete with AI in terms of the analysis, you know, identifying patterns, all the good stuff that kind of comes with some of the new and emerging opportunities around that. But there's a real tension there, isn't there? So, you know, AI will give you insight, but it doesn't provide judgment. It'll give you data, but there's no context. It can provide capability, but it can't give you accountability. And so I think as we move forward, that human element becomes increasingly important. And so for all of us around our capabilities in terms of, you know, how we influence, how we make judgments, how we balance the sort of risk reward trade-offs that are part of those conversations, the interpersonal skills like empathy. I think those things are going to become far more important for us as practitioners. And so it's really focusing on those whilst also getting better at understanding how to prompt and ask the right questions in the first place. But, you know, we're never going to compete there. So it's, I guess, what's the human differentiator? And I think there's also an interesting tension in the roles that we do, because for risk people, we're supposed to be, you know, business partners. We're supposed to, you know, be on the inside, you know, work with the business. At the same time, we're the ones that got to hold the mirror up and go, it's not working. There's a challenge, potentially sharing bad news. You've got to be able to have professional courage, you know, be brave. We have the Be Braver course at Brave, which focuses exactly on some of these sort of soft skill buildings, because the roles that we do are tricky, and that's only going to get more difficult as AI moves into that. So how do you really sort of double down on those interpersonal capabilities and how we work with the business?
Moving back to yourself, so we round out by asking, how has your career shaped who you are outside of work?
So I would actually flip that, and I would say it's more about, oh, it's more the other way around, actually. So it's more about how that has influenced my career. So my home life influenced my career. I mean, I mentioned before my children. So I've got 4 incredible children. 3 of them are neurodivergent, and being very neurotypical myself, it has been a learning curve in terms of how to kind of support them. And it's really taught me that there isn't one way to see things, that there's multiple different ways. And that I've come to really value, and I've really taken that into the workplace as well, actually. And it's interesting when we see the way organizations, whether that's our businesses or our schools, are actually configured, because it's kind of one way of doing things, and that doesn't always suit everybody. But good leaders will kind of take advantage of that in terms of bringing out the best of people, and that difference in thought, difference in perception, and really get them to contribute to that conversation, particularly for risks and decision making, in a way that might not seem obvious but can lead to so much better outcomes. So I think that has made me much more empathetic than I might have been before to understanding some of those challenges, and to how they can be a real strong positive in an organization. And again, it's back to that curiosity. So I'll see my children ask questions that to me are really obvious, when actually they're clearly not, because their brains are thinking in a different way. And actually it's those kind of things that make you get to a different outcome than what you might have done before. So look, I think it's an interesting question, but I'd say I've probably taken more from what's going on at home into the workplace than the other way around, really.
That's lovely. I love that your kids are asking you the so what and why questions that you're asking your team.
Probably where I get it from. It's like never quite grown out to the why. Or it's in auditing, you see, why.
And then finally, are there any books, which you've got just the most beautiful collection behind you, podcasts or people who have had a meaningful impact on your career that you'd recommend to others?
Well, I always giggle at this point because when we first started working at home, I'm a bit of a risk geek, and I did have my books organised in alphabetical order, but then realised I had this wonderful selection of Jilly Coopers right behind my head. So they're now off screen. I shouldn't really be sharing my secrets, should I? But look, I'm a big fiction reader, mainly because I do so much during the day with work that I kind of like to unwind outside of work hours. And I would also say I probably learn more from the conversations that I have with organisations than I do necessarily from reading. Having said that, one person who I do really admire and who I listen to and have read books from is a chap called Peter Hinson. And he talks about and has written a book called The Never Normal. And he's just phenomenal if you ever get a chance to see him speak live. He's an amazing speaker. But his central argument in his Never Normal book is all about the fact that disruption is no longer an occasional event that organisations recover from. It's actually a permanent operating environment for us all now. And so success comes from not trying to predict every change, but from building organisations that are adaptable, they're always learning, they're ready to evolve. And that actually resonates really strongly with my own thinking about this linkage between the risk and resilience agendas and actually how do you bring the both of those things together to make organisations much more adaptable given the current environment that we're living in. So I think if anybody gets a chance, Peter Hinson, who does, he's on LinkedIn, he's got books, you can watch some of his keynotes and he's phenomenal.
Lovely. I actually have a poster, a Banksy poster that says crisis as usual. And I do feel like we are in that time.
That is so right. It is so
Every
right.
day, just a crisis. Thank you so much, Emma. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I'm sure so many will feel like they've learnt so much in regards to strategic focus for risk. So thank you.
No problem. Really enjoyed it, actually. Thanks, Lucy, for the opportunity. I'm very much looking forward to our new collaboration.
Yes, and people will see some assets and news pieces, will see us together at events. I'm sure there'll be lots of things that people can engage with. But until then, we will see you next time on the Spotlight on Women in GRC. Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.